Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rabbit Hole Stories, to another exciting episode. It's been a good one, right, Ian?
No, it was really, really interesting. There was a lot discussed during this episode, and a lot of it I need to actually go away and think about and reflect on, and still doing that now after listening to it. But yeah, no, it was a fascinating episode. What sort of things captured your attention? What perked your ears up during this episode, Joel?
I mean, a lot of the stuff Theo said was very, I would say, almost normal or close to what I do during my day. So there wasn't everything new where I was like, wow, this is like, brain explosion moments. But what was really cool was he had one point during the episode where he went, we've basically been in a recession, you want to call it, the past 14, 15 years. I was like, okay, hang on, that's a good point. Let's listen to what he has to say. That was a very good part. I don't want to spoil anything.
Yeah, when he said
cool
that, I was like, yeah, it's true, because we talk about being potentially in a recession now, or one's looming and all that kind of stuff. But actually, if you zoom out, we've been in recession for quite a long time already. So that's really something that was important for me to hear, to really put into context. And thinking about it a little bit, it kind of reminds me when I was in the police, because even when I was in the police a long time ago now, all they ever did was try to cut back. The budget's been reduced and expecting more out of you, putting more pressure on everyone out there. And that's not just the police, all public services as well. And they're the ones that are suffering the most first, I think. And you see it a lot in the media. At the moment, particularly around the Met Police. They're not very popular at the moment in the media, are they?
I don't know. I don't read too much doom and gloom.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to edit all this out if this is irrelevant and stuff like that.
I think it's okay.
But at the moment, you've got a scandal going on with a Met Police officer that has just it's been revealed that he's committed something like 29 rapes during his career as a Met Police officer, and now all other woodwork is coming out now about other police officers involved in other sort of scandals and things like that. And it's a loose link to the whole recession thing, because all these cutbacks, all the fail-safes that used to be in place to police the police, if you like, or to sort of train up and recruit the right person for the role, is kind of fallen by the wayside. Because when I was in the Met, I remember the training was reduced by a number of weeks. They were churning people out more for less. Already I could start to see that the product that was coming out of training school was of a less standard than when I started doing training school. So really, a lot of the budget restraints, the police have had to make a lot of cutbacks in lots of different areas where there would have been procedures in place for them to have maybe weeded out those people that shouldn't be in the police in the first place, which has kind of led to this moment now, I think, in a way where police officers that should have been regularly reviewed and the radar should have picked them up with the previous fail-safes that might have been in place for them. And, you start to cut back the money for these services, and the impact that has not only on the police themselves, but the community in which they're serving. So him saying that, we've been in recession for some time kind of rings truth to me in a way, because coming from the public service, the services that do get hit first and most, and all these strikes that are going on at the moment just haven't happened overnight. It's been a long journey for us to get there. People will now be like, no, been taking the piss for a long time now. Now you're really taking a piss. So it's getting worse and worse and worse until people now, civil unrest is kind of the next step if this was to continue, is my feeling. And that's what I kind of took away from what he was saying.
Yeah, I mean, with the strikes, I might have a different opinion. Obviously, the public sector needs to be strengthened in some form and fashion, but there's always a way how you go about these things, right? But I think that's a different topic for like our tea party in a week.
Yeah, no, it will be. But it's just got the cogs thinking, really. It's just got me kind of sort of thinking about how money affects everyone else, and the lack of money and the impact that it has.
Yeah, I mean, fix the money, fix the world, right? It's not just a saying.
Yeah,
it really
absolutely.
has a lot of truth to it.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I think the episode was it's a thinker episode for sure, but Theo and Angelo, for that matter, they're both brothers, last week's guests, they really had a gift of articulating and bringing these things forward in a very simple fashion. So, definitely an exciting one to listen to. But I think we shouldn't hold people back too long. And,
no.
We want to have them
you guys to enjoy this episode.
Yeah. So with that in mind, have fun listening to Theo and his rabbit hole story, and definitely a lot of things to think about for the next, I'd say, 60 minutes.
Yeah, enjoy, guys.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another week's episode of Rabbit Hole Stories. My name is Ian, and who have we got here today? We've got our usual co-host, and that is Joel. Hello, Joel. You all right, mate?
I'm doing good, Ian. How are you?
Yeah, I'm living the dream, as they say. It's been a mad 24 hours, but it's not about me today. But yeah, it's been an eventful day today.
You got some nice hats or you got a nice hat and a nice t-shirt on.
Yeah, I'm all merched up. I've probably got ahead of myself a little bit and got overexcited. But do you know what? The Rabbit Hole Stories logo, which I drew, wasn't it, Joel? Kind of last minute. It took me about half hour to draw this and produce this. And I've sent Joel a copy of the picture. And he was like, yep, let's do it. Let's go for that one. So I've gone ahead and got the T-shirt printed. I've got the baseball cap as well. So yeah, I'm representing Rabbit Hole Stories today. Who else we got here today? We've got Theo. Hello, Theo.
Hello.
You all right,
Thanks
mate?
for having me. Yeah, all good. Appreciate it being on.
It's a pleasure. Mate, could you spend a couple of minutes just introducing yourself and telling us who you are?
Yeah, for sure. My name's Theo. Been in the Bitcoin space for probably 7 years now. I'm still reasonably fresh-faced, so that means I started at 16, 17 when I was in school, really. I started out with massive interest in economics, and I quickly realized that school, especially where I grew up in Wales, was not as keen on teaching about money as I was keen to learn about it. In the whole of Wales,
Right.
When I said that I wanted to study economics A-level, said there are 2 colleges in the whole of Wales that will teach you economics A-level. And I was like, screw that, I'm going to teach it to myself. So I dropped out
Right.
partly dropped out, so I studied economics and psychology myself. And during those like self-autodidactic periods, I was very much interested in Bitcoin and how that fed into things, because I guess part of me has a more of a rebellious, questioning nature of, systemic hegemony and things like that. So I was quite keen to delve into that world and see where that took me. And I guess 7 years later, I'm still here. So it was a good decision.
Brilliant. And so you grew up in Wales.
Yeah.
Whereabouts in Wales were you? Whereabouts in the
This is where
lovely
I
country of
dox
Wales
myself
did you grow up?
and give my exact location. So I grew up in a beautiful seaside town called Somersfoot, but most people know the adjacent town called Tenby. And it's a little fisher village and not much goes on. It's certainly picturesque and great to come and retire, but not necessarily the best place to begin a burgeoning career in tech finance and Bitcoin.
Tenby, that's like, isn't there a ferry that you can get from there? or nearby.
Mate, I think no one knows the fuck where it is.
No, hold on. No, hold on. Tenby's kind of.
Ice cream stand next to that hot dog guy called Jeff, and he'll give you 2 for 1 on a Tuesday. Yeah, yes, Ian, that's exactly where I'm from. How did you know?
Mate, I don't know. It's the crystal ball, but isn't Tenby's not far from Swansea, right? Am I right there?
Yeah, an hour, which in Wales terms is okay distance.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, that was have to do then. Okay, cool. I'm fascinated. I know the only reason I asked because I wanted to ask your brother Angelo that last time a little bit about because we got a little bit about his childhood, but I wanted to sort of really understand what Wales was like in your kind of childhood. What was going on in Wales at that time of your youth? What were the kind of activities that you were getting up to in Wales in your younger years?
I would say the general culture, the academic culture, the social culture at the ages as far back as I could really remember. But if we just take the secondary school period, which is around 13 to 18, it was largely filled with we could call it a philosophy, but a complete disinterest in learning and studying. If you were smart, it was really frowned upon by your peers. Success was not credited at all. You really wanted to play down any form of achievement. It was just not something where you felt nurtured in that kind of environment. And I don't know whether that was just like the specific school I went to. It's funny, like I went to I won't say the name of it, but so the school I went to, we all thought the other schools were crap, and like our school was the good one. Like we were the gem in Wales. And then as soon as I kind of left and started talking to people from other schools, it's like, no, we all thought your school was the bad one. So what we got up to was just kind of like just hanging out. Like there was a lot of people, I think, from families that weren't as supportive, or as like, I was very fortunate to have a really great kind of mother and father figure role in my life. So I was much happier staying at home, whereas I would say a lot of my peers were going out and smoking weed at really young ages, getting really drunk at really young ages, skateboarding, getting up to all the kind of mischief at 13, 14, which is for people that mature at different ages, it's kind of strange, but yeah.
Yeah, because I grew up and still live in London, and I'm always interested to hear other people growing up in other parts of this country and how different the experience is throughout the different parts of the country. Like urban city life in London, my childhood was, I think, maybe somewhat different to yours, coming from a small little town, Tenby in Wales. So yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. One important question
the weather wasn't great often. Like Wales is known for raining a hell of a lot, so it wasn't like, whilst you could see the sea from my high school, secondary school, it certainly wasn't like we didn't go down to go see it very often. It was very cold and raining, so it certainly wasn't Hawaii-esque.
It rains a lot in Hawaii as well. So.
It does rain. Yeah, it does apparently. But how did Bitcoin find you in Tenby?
Bitcoin found me in Tenby because similar story to Angelo, which was just I think my dad was a strong influence on coming to me and wanting to bring up the conversation of money. What is money? Like economics, finance. I think he was aware of a systemic structure of the way that money is used and created and the manipulation of it, and how it wasn't necessarily of interest to his kids when they come up into the world. The system wasn't necessarily designed to help his kids thrive. So I think that played a role into his general interest around money and stuff. So Ethereum came up, and he's not the most techie, and was like, hey, do you guys want to have a look at this? And then we ended up buying Ethereum at like stupid low prices, thinking it was like the all-time high at $10, and like buying some at $8 and going, oh, this is a terrible idea. I remember putting my entire life savings into it, which at like 16, 17 was not a lot of money, but still at the time felt ridiculous. And
it was a lot of money for you at the time, I imagine.
Yeah. But fortunately, I had a dad that was very supportive of that, and was understood the role that risk taking has, and educated risk taking has, and understanding the difference, or understanding that inaction is also a choice. So if you choose not to do something, that is still a choice. You're choosing the negative. You're choosing the antithesis. You're choosing the status quo, and that can be the silent killer. And I think my dad was happy to, for us as his kids, obviously who he cared about, to take that role of potentially taking one foot outside the structure of what society kind of puts for you as get this, go here, get this job, get your education, and have one foot outside just to see what other options that there are. And I think as long as it doesn't wipe you out, it can at least help you learn. There's a quote, it's like, the more you fuck around, the more you find out. So he was certainly happy for us to fuck around a little.
Yeah, I mean, with making mistakes, the idea is to learn from those mistakes, right? And once you came across and discovered Ethereum, I imagine that was realized as a mistake. Am I being presumptuous in assuming that, or is that something you're still involved with?
So now I'm very much a Bitcoin maximalist. Whether my involvement in Ethereum you could characterize as a mistake, I don't know. I guess it's what lens you want to put on it. It helped a lot. It rapidly increased the rate at which I learned about technology and blockchain, and it also gave contrast to what Bitcoin was. And back in 2017, it wasn't obvious that, 2016, it wasn't like as obvious as it is now that it was an inferior technology, or the problems surrounding it, and the way it's now gone with proof of stake and OFAC compliance and everything that's going on now. That wasn't like back then. It was, Bitcoin's splitting. There's a block size war. Like Bitcoin was actually more contentious than Ethereum. So not a mistake. It served its role in my life, and I've thanked it and moved on.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this is always what I'm trying to tell a lot of people. It's two different systems. Let's call it this way. Either you decide to get on board of a peer-to-peer system, a truly peer-to-peer system, with different characteristics, security measurements, that being Bitcoin, obviously, for everyone listening, where you can build on top of a very based fundamental structure, whether that be with Lightning, with all the different things that work there, or you want to go into a network that has, I'd say, different characteristics as well, but the base layer is very much changing on a bi-yearly basis, it seems. So it's up to everyone who decides. But they're definitely, now it's more clear what the differences are. But I remember also back in the days, Theo, I got a lot of friends going on board, because back then I was still living in Switzerland. I was actually living very, very close to where the Ethereum Foundation, I think, was founded, or at least a lot of them lived there. So I saw like Vitalik a couple of times at the train station, and knowing that this weird kid is probably going to build something similar to like Bitcoin back in the days. And I remember a lot of people getting on board and eventually either landing at Bitcoin or realizing the difference between the two ecosystems. without a judge. I hope this is like Angelo last time. Your brother said a very nice thing. Like, we don't need to judge people on where they started or where they're currently in their journey. If they end in Bitcoin, if they're deciding to split up and do different routes, good for them as well. But yeah, we like the orange coin, so we tend to land there.
Yeah, and I realised my question was a little bit unfair the way I approached you with that. But thank you for being open and earnest about it. Because I think most people I've spoken to about their journey into Bitcoin, it does involve them getting into Ethereum and other or slash shitcoins, whatever they want to call it. You know, people's route into Bitcoin does involve the whole crypto world as well. And we had a whole conversation with your brother last time about Bitcoin maximalists. I think that he said something along the lines of they can go and suck a dick or something.
Yeah.
And he gave a whole eloquent explanation as to why that is. Like, if you know the escape route, you know, you should be showing people the way out, and that is Bitcoin. But just because these other people might sort of see Bitcoin in their own way doesn't lean them towards, well, you shouldn't then start judging people because they might still be holding on to other assets. You know, once they understand Bitcoin, they understand Bitcoin. Just because they get it doesn't necessarily mean that they're an arsehole because they might hold some Solana or something like that.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think from going into the space, even like originally, it was very oh god, I'm trying to find a better way to say it. It's I'm trying to find a
Just say it.
non-profanity. It's a intellectual piss. I don't even know what the saying is. Intellectual.
Mate, you can swear. You can swear on the podcast.
I don't know what it is. Yeah, it was very ego driven, and it was from a culture of like Craig Wright and kind of the two camps, and there was a lot of like intellectual superiority and posturing, and not often the healthiest place to come from. And it's like really interesting, like you see the people that are really building, like the Adam Back, and I struggled to find an interview of him being a Bitcoin maximalist in the sense that a lot of these other people are. And these are people on the front lines, like they're actually they're pitching the ship and changing directions for the entire ecosystem, let alone humanity. And you can very rarely see him in any way posturing his intellectual stance. He's very humble, very quiet. And I think that kind of got me as a young man coming into kind of I'd say a teenager coming into the adult world for the first time and trying to feel like I had to show up in a certain frame or a certain persona. And that certainly did, like I was a product of the environment, which was trying to puff up my chest and pretend that I was some, you know, exceptional this, that, and the other with my like superiority, that I knew X, Y, and Z, like the fact that Bitcoin was better in all these ways. Like I remember going to conferences in London in 2017, and like there was lots of people that were naive to Bitcoin and naive to the space, and clearly were trying to get money. And part of me doesn't blame them, you know. Like it's not easy working a standard corporate job that doesn't pay you anywhere near the living wage, and you're kind of on ends meet. Of course, you're going to try find another way. But I remember going around saying, yeah, but why can't your project use an MFN SQL database? Like, why do you need a distributed blockchain? That's a very ineffective way to store and transmit data. You don't need to combine networking and databasing here. Like, you can just have a permission database and it'll work much better. And they'll be like, oh, I don't, and then always brushing me off. And looking back, it was like, there was no need for me to come at it in that sense. But that was the culture. It was debates, it was antagonizing, it was one-upmanship. And I think if we're being brutally honest, there's certainly two frames. The Greeks had two words for it. It was philosophia and philonikeia. Philosophia stood for the love of knowledge, or the love of enlightenment, loosely translated. It was the love of coming to kind of a common turn and both improving your stance. And then philonikeia was the love of victory, essentially. And it was that coming from more of a place of ego. And I wish I had the wisdom to, and even today, like I can slip into it, and I have to bring myself down. It's like, what's really the purpose here? Are we hunting down truth? Are we hunting down knowledge? Or am I hunting down a victory? For what? For my ego? For for superficial reasons, so that I can be seen as the greater person in this conversation, or in this meeting? Like, it's so short term. So I always try and kind of remember that, and remember why we're all here, which is Bitcoin is truth, and that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, I put a tweet out a couple of days ago, when the recording will air, probably a week ago, where I said something along the lines of, it doesn't help if we call everything a scam and not educating about people why it possibly might be a scam, or what the characteristics of a scam are. Because that's what I discovered in late 2017 as well, I think. There used to be a scam called OneCoin. I was never invested into it, because looking at it for like 5 minutes, I realized, hang on a minute, this is either a multi-level marketing, or it's the biggest fraud there is, because there was nowhere, like, you couldn't find a block explorer, you couldn't find like a token address, and all of these things to like essentially check if that token is legit. And I remember speaking to a lot of my fellow Bitcoiner friends, and to like my normal people friends. Like, they discovered OneCoin because, like you said, Theo, they were able to make a quick buck. They promised, like, put $1,000 in, buy this in this package, and you'll make like $500,000. I was like, wow, if it would be that easy, like every fucking Wall Street bank would be in this project, right?
Yeah.
And I remember every one of my Bitcoin friends was like, yeah, it's a scam, ignore it. I was like, yeah, it's obviously a scam, but like, we need to teach normal people why it's a scam, what could be possibly the reasons for it to be a scam. Later on, it uncovered itself to be a huge scam. I think the top, whatever, CEO or whatever she was, she's still on the hunt or on the FBI's most wanted list. So clearly it had the characteristics of a big time fraud. But Bitcoiners, we do so bad in educating people about these things. And also, if I see it, like the discussions on Twitter, like 2-3 days ago, someone put out like ETH now has whatever yield on its product. I'm like, okay, first of all, it said how it's generating the yield. So we need to dig deeper and find out how it really works. But again, we did the typical Bitcoin laser eye maxi thing of calling it a scam and moving on, and not educating normal people in the replies, like telling them, hey, these are the differences. Again, back to my previous statement, these are two different systems. If you want to be in one system, very replicant of the current financial systems, you can go into Ethereum. I know a lot of fintechs because I work with them together. They're building on top of that system. They like that. And then there are other companies saying like, okay, we want to do something different and we want to go down the Bitcoin hole, which essentially, down to its most nature form, is a peer-to-peer payment system. And I think we need to do better as Bitcoiners there to educate people. But yeah, long ways to go. Let's call it that, where we need to improve.
Yeah.
So looking back now, Theo, you got in with Ethereum. What made you stick with Bitcoin in the end then? Was it really personas like Adam Beck, seeing how humble they were, what they were building, or was it something else?
It was certainly a gradual process. I think it. Okay, so I mean, the rough pitch is that the only reason to have a blockchain is to achieve something. Like, having a blockchain is pointless unless you're doing something with it. So what do you want to achieve? You want to achieve censorship resistance. But but first of all, to get that, you need decentralization. So censorship resistant is the goal. We want money that is censorship resistant, so that it's completely openly democratic, that nobody has command and control over. Nobody can set the state and chain of the ledger beyond the democracy, the rule of law set by all the nodes on the network. So to get that, we have decentralization. And then from decentralization, it's like, right, a blockchain is the best technology to achieve that. Okay, so Ethereum has the blockchain, and then it was questionable whether it had the decentralization, even at the time, less so now. Now it's gone to proof of stake. And that lack of decentralization meant that it wasn't censorship resistant. So then why do you need the blockchain? And it became quite just a linear thought process of a technology is only a tool to serve a function to help achieve an end goal. Why would I use a tool if it's not fit for purpose? So blockchain was a tool to achieve censorship resistant, to achieve an open permissionless monetary source and an open network that anyone can use, and to bank the unbanked across the globe. And Ethereum was not doing that. It's like, oh, yes, you can spin up your NFT or your project, but like, what's the point? Like, if it can be shut down, then you can use other technologies. So you don't need a token, essentially. So
yeah, I mean, what's really scary.
Yeah. Sorry. There's a bit of a lag.
Sorry. No worries. What's really scary there is also like how much influence, and I talked to a lot of friends who are, I wouldn't call them Ethereum maxis, but they're very convinced of the ecosystem. And again, unfortunately, that war we're fighting in between, where it's like, no one is actually open to listen to any other criticism or whatever. And I always tell them, like, hey, isn't it dangerous that like Hetzner, for example, is a big hosting provider in like Germany, Austria and such. And they announced before the merge that they're going to basically shut down any account that's running a Ethereum node on their servers. And the same could be said if like AWS does the same thing. So whenever I talk to people saying like, you can argue the decentralization of it, because I could be a validator on like, let's say that network, but just because I am one of them doesn't mean that the whole thing is decentralized if they are legit centralized institutions that can shut it down. So yeah, that's probably one of the first steps, I guess, for many to like start questioning, okay, it says decentralized in like the marketing copy, but what is decentralization really? Would that also be like the first clue that got you lured into or close to the Bitcoin rabbit hole?
Yeah. I would say that was one of the first things. The easier things to understand are obviously the hard money, the fact that it's only ever 21 million, the fact that, but
that's debatable. That's debatable, according to Jamie Dimon.
yeah, it's yeah.
Who knows? Satoshi's picture might come up and laugh at you.
Yeah, it might be an NFT, mate.
Yeah, it's just a pet rock, after all.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, it's like just that conversation alone around having an inelastic monetary base. Like, even now in the last 6 months, I've started to have questions around why did we have elastic money in the first place? And having some form of elasticity, like the reason that central bank, like the Federal Reserve, got created was because seasonally money flows in the US would seep inwards. It would head into the Midlands where a lot of the agriculture was produced, and it would literally be sucked out of the coastal cities, which would leave the lack of money. So the ideally, in a perfect world, money should be completely translucent. So when an eye works properly, you shouldn't be able to see it. When it's not working properly, you can see the eye through the vision. So when money doesn't work properly as it should, it becomes noticeable. And I have to think about it. I shouldn't have to think about money. Money should be as saleable, as liquid, as instantly possible as it possibly can. And I shouldn't be thinking that my pound has now devalued against the dollar, and should I keep my money in dollars, or is my money going to lose 10% of its value this year. I'm now having to treat my pounds as an investment. So the inaction choice, which is keeping my money in pounds or dollars, is now becoming a very prevalent action choice. And that action choice is forcing me to now prefer other action choices, such as seeking riskier and riskier investments, to seek any form of capital preservation, not even growth, just to hold my purchasing power. I now have to move capital in ways that I don't want to. So money is losing its functionality. And that was one of the reasons central banks stepped in, because as all this money got sucked out of the coastal regions, there was massive deflation, because there was suddenly money supply dropped in half. So all goods and services in dollar terms got pushed up, and it was like, shit, it's really handy to be able to meet when money works properly. Money should be able to facilitate good, productive investments when they're needed. A role of a commercial bank traditionally is to be a mediator or a broker between a monetary source, a monetary funding source for good mum and pop shops or for accurate investing. It's the productive capital. It's easy access. There's a Walter Badgett quote, which was lend freely on good credit at cheap rates or something like that. And it was basically saying to have an economy that works functionally, for good investments, lend cheaply. And money kind of somewhere along the way lost its. So if we pull this all back to the hard money thing, it was like, yeah, Bitcoin's hard money, but hard money then accumulates, because if hard money is accumulating value, and this is, I know, very, very contentious in like the Bitcoin ecosystem, but it's just a thought that I've been having and hasn't necessarily been answered. And
no, please, absolutely, mate, have your thoughts out loud, because this is the only way that we are ever going to sort of really understand what Bitcoin can do and fix and not fix in the world, is by having these critical conversations, talking about the way that we see the world under the Bitcoin umbrella. And there's going to be agreements and disagreements all the time. And I think that's only part of I think that's an important part of the conversation, is people bringing their thoughts and their processes and their reflections out and putting it out there for discussion. So yeah, please, mate, carry on.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think going off your point there is like, Bitcoin's final form is still unknown in many regards. Like there's a bug. Most people don't know this. There's a problem. Satoshi wasn't the best coder in the world. There is a bug in the code, which will mean Bitcoin will have to be hard forked at some point. 21 something. There are changes that are going to happen, and the ultimate form in which society uses Bitcoin is still up for debate. So having a completely hard money in which is deflationary. I also think in economics, inflation is a terrible word, because it can mean so many different things. You can have asset inflation, which is what we talk about quite often, like prices of stocks, bonds going up. So that's inflationary. You also have the traditional, just normal inflation, which is like the CPI, like a basket of goods. And you can also have productive inflation or productive deflation, the actual increase in the productive capacity of an economy. And having hard money pool, because if money is hard and you have productive inflation, i.e. the amount of goods and services that economy is producing over time increases, but the amount of money doesn't grow to match it, then that money per unit of good or service is going to be worth more over time. So what ends up happening is people start being able to hold the money as an investment as well. So why would I need to, risk my money investing in such and such when I could just hold it forever and get 3 to 4%? So I'm kind of sucking money off the table, which is which can cause a lot of problems. Which, I'm not saying it
Yeah, because
will, but
Bitcoin,
I'm
in a
saying,
way,
yeah.
it incentivizes saving, right? Is that what you're saying? And through that incentive, there's going to be an issue with how then we trade and how free flowing that trade might be because of the deflationary environment that
Exactly,
Bitcoin provides.
yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, essentially that.
That's, sorry to interrupt you, mate, but that's
No, go for
crossed
it.
my thought as well. That's crossed my mind as well a few times, and it's quite a difficult one to think about and fathom, because I'm coming from a perspective whereby that we don't know what Bitcoin is going to look like in the future and how and what it will change. Socially, economically, politically, it's going to make big changes, but what those changes are going to be, it's almost impossible to really articulate that in your mind based on the current understanding of the world as it exists today. And I see Bitcoin in the future being something whereby it really recalibrates the way we trade with each other and what we consider tradable. And I'm kind of always coming up against a wall about, if Bitcoin is deflationary and it incentivizes you not spending that, then are things going to look completely different economically, and how then will we trade with one another, and how it's quite a difficult thing to comprehend. I don't know if I'm making any sense right now, because I'm kind of in my little mind palace right now of confusion around the future of Bitcoin. But it's brought up an interesting thought in my mind.
I think what you're getting at is essentially that having a, which a lot of Bitcoiners, and I would argue as well, and I think we all would, that the different dynamics, the different features that Bitcoin holds will make global trade, our global economy operate very differently than the world we have now. We can even see that the world we have now isn't like, we often chunk the fiat world as like this one thing that exists outside of Bitcoin, and it's this world move, this like massive move from fiat to Bitcoin one day, and Bitcoin hyper normalization and all these things. But like, even the fiat world is going through massive change, and it's an experiment in and of itself. Most people don't realize we've actually been in a depression for the last 15 years, because the rate of growth, we live in a very geometric world. The amount of the amount of new debt that needs to be created on an annualized basis to pay off the interest on the old debt is increasing exponentially. So if the rate of growth just increases linearly, you're actually there's a delta difference. So the rate of growth of needing services go like this, and you're just growing like this. So up until 2008, we were growing at 5-6% year on year. That's now less than half since 2008. So we're really underserviced. And what does that mean? It means that banks, what happened is 2008 actually scared the shit out of a lot of banks. Like, they're not being as greedy as they were in the past. We're living in a system, like, why is interest rates so low? It's because they can't get the banks to lend. The reason the central bank was charging like negative interest rates, like I know in Germany and stuff, it went fully negative, was because they were like, Jesus guys, please just give out money. And the banks were saying, no, we really don't want to, because of trust, of custody risk, of counterparty risk. We don't trust that people will be able to pay us back. We're going to preference liquidity. And there is so much that we get wrong, going back to like how I started this. Like, nobody wants to teach economics. And I went to uni for a year. The first year, I was like, shit, everything they're teaching me is not right. Like, and only through the years I've come to realize this. Like, why? Like, the thing we're taught is like interest rates, low interest rates. That's a sign of good times. Like, when you think of in the 1920s, 1930s Great Depression, would you say that's an inflationary or deflationary time, the Great Depression? What would you say? Did interest rates did interest rates go up or down in the Great Depression? Would you guess?
My initial response would be it would have had to go up because that's what they have to do to counteract certain measurements. But the way you frame the question, I'm thinking like, was it deflationary actually? I would have gone with they have to go up because they need to counteract, right?
So the natural pricing of money says that in good times, when money is of massive availability, interest rates go down because supply has gone up, so the price has gone down. But then in the Great Depression, interest rates plummeted. Why? Because the environment is seeking safety and security. People are scared, which they have been, which is why interest rates now for the last 15 years have been so low. It's because people are scared. Sorry, I just let my dog out.
No worries.
So like very simple, like 3 years of uni, that isn't taught. Like, why can't they get bond yields off the floor? It's because there's a flight to safety and security. And now what we're seeing now with the breaking of the bond market, the repo crisis, is even they're not treating government bonds as safe and secure. And there's probably going to be a next wave into US equities and commercial stocks. But yeah, all this to say is like markets are very dynamic. Even the fiat system, which a lot of people don't truly kind of understand themselves, that's still rapidly changing. And the way Bitcoin will eventually play into that will be very different in 5 years. It's not a linear game here. Like, it's rapidly evolving. And yeah, I think anyone with like one set notion of the way this is going to work is probably a bit naive.
Yeah, because like, sorry, Joel, I know you was about to say something, but what I'm finding when I'm having conversations, when I'm putting questions out there on Twitter or something like that, is that people have this kind of answer in their mind. And it's a lot of the answers they have, or a lot of the predictions they have about what Bitcoin can bring to the world is based on an out-of-date, broken legacy system. Like, and the way I approach things is like, I think the world is going to look very different under a hyper Bitcoinization, hyper Bitcoin standard, whatever you want to call it. I think it's going to look very different. And I think it might be a combination of the many different ideologies and social economic structures that we have present today. There's going to be a combination or something completely different that we're yet to even understand and fathom about how it can exist in the world, particularly if you're talking about building on top of Bitcoin and the layers that it can, things that can be built on top of it, things that, are even sort of, and people get stuck in that kind of mindset, and they're not open-minded enough to really have those critical conversations. And I think it's important we do have those critical conversations, because Bitcoin, I think, in my mind, is going to win. It's going to be there's going to be aha moments all over the place. And when it gets to that point where a lot of people have adopted Bitcoin, these conversations should have already started. And we should now have these conversations, because you get quite a lot of polarized views and people stuck in that view. I'm constantly trying to sort of search that landscape a little bit and sort of like take a little bit from here and there and sort of hold it for a little bit and reflect on it and understand it a bit more. Is that something that you're open to doing as well, Theo?
Yeah, definitely. And like, even as time goes on, the way I understand it changes. Like when Saylor came on the scene, he was very much talking about Bitcoin the asset, and it was all about Bitcoin the asset. And how Bitcoin is a saving technology and how it is a hedge against the inflationary pressures of the traditional world. It's the fact that on a median Western income, you will never be able to outpace inflation. You know, all these fancy things, like saying that, well, if you're in the basement with just eating pizza and drinking Mountain Dew, inflation for you is like 3%. But if you want to buy early retirement and you want to buy a basket of stocks and some bonds, well, they're appreciating at 30% a year, some of the growth stocks. So it was like the hurdle rate that you need to just preserve wealth is now 14%. How the hell are you going to do that? Bitcoin is the only asset that outperforms that. Bitcoin is the future. And I was like, shit, yeah, this is pumped. Like, Bitcoin is savings technology. Right. It's amazing. And then like Jason Lowery came on the scene and was like, oh, Bitcoin the asset is the least exciting thing. What's actually amazing are these miners, this proof of work, this transposing of the military industrial complex onto an electron, onto a transistor unit, and having this whole battle that's won every 10 minutes every time a new block is mined, where somebody gets to write the state and update the chain of all transactions, instead of, if you open a history textbook, it's military oppression and warfare, and the victor writes the ledger. So now the ledger is written by a distributed set of miners, and we can have, instead of mutually assured destruction by a nuclear trident somewhere in the South Pacific that will pop up and take out Moscow before Moscow takes out us, we now have Moscow comes online and actually supports the US, and US will support Moscow. And it's a whole different paradigm for how we can organize and coordinate as a human species. And that's an existential philosophical frame for Bitcoin. And I was like, shit, yeah, this is the new cool thing. Like, Bitcoin, the asset, yeah, I can make money, but a whole new command control structure. And then, like, Jack Mallers arrives and gives this speech on stage and talks about, like, the most exciting thing is Bitcoin, the network, and the fact that the Lightning Network is this open permissionless network that usurps Visa and MasterCard and allows anyone to access across the world. I can send money to someone in Ghana instantly at no cost, and they don't need Western Union taking 40%, not because Western Union's evil, but because they have overheads, because they're working in a traditional anachronistic system, which is, we need physical locations holding physical cash that has exchange rate risk, that has balance sheet risk, that has staff, and those overheads aren't needed in the Lightning Network. Why? Because Bitcoin is the first digitally native asset, which is to say everything, and I love this analogy, I was thinking about it earlier, everything goes through a 3-step process. The first step is the physical state of things. It's the thing we use before technology. Let's take the written letter. If I wanted to send my dad, who lives in England and I live in Wales, in the year 1900, I could write him a letter, and I would send that letter. And then technology improves somewhat, and it takes that existing frame and it goes, we can do this, but improve its efficiency by half making it technical. So the substrate is still physical, but we can augment it with some technological adaptation. So we use the fax machine. Now, I'm a bit young, but from what the boomers have told me about a fax machine is that you would scan it and it would send it to somebody else's fax machine and it would print out another physical copy.
Oh,
so
you're bringing back
physical.
Such good memories now, Theo.
It was still physical, but it was augmented with technology. And then we had the first digitally native letter, which was email. And we went from physically native to technically augmented to then technically native or technologically native. And that's the process that money's gone through. Bitcoin is the first asset, the first digital asset, which is no longer a liability of somebody else. It is a native asset. The only time we've had native assets in history was when it's physical. That is gold, that is property. That property is my asset and is not the liability of a third party. The whole fiat system that we've had for the last century since we came off the gold standard in the UK in 1915, since they defaulted on the gold promise in 1933 with Article 1031 something, when they defaulted on the gold window in 1971 with Nixon. In that whole period, all digital money was a liability of a central bank or a commercial bank. They own my money. I just had an IOU with them. Bitcoin's the first non-IOU. You don't need to IO me. I don't need to IO you. It's just mine.
Yeah, and
if you want to try, take it.
Yeah, and I mean, the scary thing is, that's my struggle in the Bitcoin world, because I see a lot of, throughout my day job, I see a lot of behind the scenes in, I wouldn't say the traditional fiat world or the finance world, but I do get a look behind fintechs and modern banking as we know it, let's call it that, whether you go by definition like if you have an account with like Monzo in the UK, or whether you have like Revolut internationally, whatever it is. They're struggling as well, because they're like, bloody hell, we want to bring money into the 21st century. And I can guarantee you all of those banks, whether they be commercial, high street, neobank, whatever, none of them like that they have IOUs on their balance sheet. None of them actually like that they can't explain to their customers why they now suddenly have to raise interest rates, to lower them. You briefly mentioned before the negative interest rates. Obviously, being Swiss native, it fucking hurt if you got that letter, usually in January, February, where it said, yeah, we're going down further than what we expected. And none of them, and I think that's a big thing, the Bitcoin community as a whole struggles to understand. None of them actually want that shit. They're just forced into that system, which is where I want to cross the bridge, Theo. Just recently, we heard a lot of news like coming out that I think the Saudis, China, Russia, and some other entities are working on like gold-backed stablecoins, for example, which is sort of they're trying to fit the best of both worlds, bringing back some form of gold coverage. Again, debatable. I'm a big gold enthusiast, but again, debatable. And sort of combining that with digital payment rails, digital rails, however you want to call them. Do you feel like Bitcoin could in the future be an underlying asset there where, and this is where I think Bitcoin could head towards in the payment network, where you say, okay, instead of like backing something with gold, we're going to use this digitally native asset in Bitcoin with all of its benefits and proof of work, all of the mining energy debate behind it. And instead of relying on like gold or on a central authority with like a central bank, we use that digital native thing out there in the interwebs. We build on top of that, and we're trying to integrate the current system into this. I personally believe that this could be like the next 20 years in Bitcoin, that they're going to find a way to integrate it, and then on top of that, build for a new future. Or do you see it completely different, that it has to be built entirely on Bitcoin, and this is like the record we need to set on for the next 50 years?
So is that a question asking whether we will have other native assets on the Bitcoin blockchain, or is that whether the Bitcoin asset will be used in reserve in the traditional system?
I think it can go in both ways. I think firstly, because we need to get back to some form of reserve system. I mean, you mentioned it before with like the amounts of growth we have currently and the expected debt ceiling you have to raise. It's clear that at one point you have to have a reserve to back that up, or you just do the complete opposite, crash it to zero and start again. But I think out of that we can build other assets on top of that. Or do you think, like, I'm talking shit and crazy here, it has to be a reserve, or it has to be the other way? There is no middle ground.
No. So I think what Bitcoin has managed to achieve is a form of semi-immaculate conception. I think it would be nice to have a more decentralized ownership of Bitcoins. I think it is no more than the current system, but there is a centralization in some hands and in some technocratic hands, which not necessarily a great thing. Where am I going with that? So what that's to say is that what Bitcoin is enabling is it never sacrificed what was important for what was expedient at the time. It never sacrificed what we said in the beginning, which was that that ability to be censorship resistant for anything else. What it did was it held strong throughout all those times when there was the Bitcoin block size debate and all of these things about improving the TPS and whatnot. And it was like, no, we're optimizing. The optimization function of Bitcoin is censorship resistance, is hard money. And then what we can do after that is we can abstract layers on top of it. So we're going to build extensibility on further up layers instead of baking it in natively to the base layer. So why that is so important, and is the reason why like things like the Lightning Network can derive from something with 10-minute block times with a transaction fee of like 50p natively, why from that we can get instant and free transactions. It can derive it because it can exact certain features and enable them, because if anything ever goes wrong, it will collapse the abstraction instantaneously or semi-instantaneously, and dispute resolution can happen natively on the base chain. Whereas if any other technology like Ethereum does that, because of the complexity, you can't build. Oh, let me stay on track to actually answer your question. So the answer is yes. I think that you can build a lot. Like I mean, look at now like Taro and what I can never say his name. Like roast beef with Lightning is doing, like enabling alternative assets on Bitcoin with Taproot and Taro. It's like that, years people were like, "Oh, Bitcoin's cool, but you can't do like stable coins." It's like, well, now we can. Yep, now we can. And Bitcoin's cool, but you couldn't do smart contracting. Hey, guess what? Now we can. And guess what? We have all of the other things that we also had from the beginning, i.e. censorship resistance, which was the only thing that ever fucking mattered with blockchain. And that's all there is to it. So yes, I think I would love to see a world where there is an ability for for commercial banking. Okay. So can I go on a little tangent for like 3-4 minutes?
Yeah, sure. Go for
it. Crack on.
Go for it.
So the reason have you heard of the term shadow banking?
Yeah,
I haven't personally, but so yeah, go on, please explain.
So shadow banking is also kind of, I guess it can be used synonymously with the Eurodollar market or Euro banks, which Euro is a bit of a misnomer. Euro just means offshore banks. And what happened in the 40s, 50s, 60s was the central banks really were struggling to. Let me take it one step easier. Most of the dollars, the dollars that have been created since the 60s have been liabilities of a bank that operates offshore with no regulation, have printed money into existence, and has no accountability of a central bank. Most Bitcoiners still think that the central
it's like the Euro banking system, right?
Yeah,
exactly. These private individuals who are doing these sort of like they're shifting money around to suit their own agenda and needs. I understand it.
And the Federal Reserve was kind of happy that this was going on because they were expanding the monetary base rapidly, which helped facilitate growth globally. So at the end of the Second World War, there was a massive need to rebuild. There was a massive capital requirement in order to fund infrastructure projects to build the world that we have now. Like a lot of it's Europe and Japan, and like major economies needed massive capital financing requirements. And the US, simply because of something called Triffin's dilemma, where Triffin, an economist, said that because the dollar at the end of the war, we came to this Bretton Woods system, which was the dollar was going to be used as the reserve requirement for the world, But there was an innate problem with that, is because domestic monetary policy wasn't always aligned, and often wasn't aligned with foreign monetary policy. What was best for the world using your dollar was not necessarily best for you domestically. And over time that's played out, and where America's at now is like they've lost all their gold reserves and they've hollowed out their industrial base. So it really didn't serve them very well historically. So these shadow banks started popping up to help finance, because there was a need for dollars. So these shadow banks popped up, which started out, as your commercial like Citibank, blah, 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 and then ended up not dealing with retail clients directly, but becoming these lenders that would make money by making money. And they would print money, and they were kind of easing the Federal Reserve's requirement, easing this Triffin's dilemma, and enabling kind of offshore dollars, which aren't real dollars, but they're kind of priced in dollars for convenience, but it's just like privately created money, which is not transparent, is mostly held off book. A lot of these credit swaps, a lot of these currency swaps are completely held off books. There's crazy accounting fictions that goes on to manipulate who has what, and it's fully trust-based between these private, massive commercial entities. And that just boomed the monetary, and it worked so well that it led to like 2008, which was like the major financial crisis, because there was so much capital in the system. Which then, when I said like in the last 15 years why we've had such low interest rates, it's because after 2008 a lot of that stopped, because a lot of these commercial entities that were just happy making money, and because all money is a liability, they were stacking liabilities, so they were backing liabilities, the reserve of a liability to make more liabilities. A lot of the 2008 crash was actually the fact that there wasn't liquidity in order to service some debt requirements that was acting as collateral for other debt requirements. So it was just this massive cascade down to, oh shit, a flight to bonds, which was the only safe asset. So long story short is, there is a demand for elastic money. There is a demand for money when it is for productive means, and when it works too well, it ends up in non-productive means. But there is a demand for that's why a bank exists, to maneuver money through a system as effectively as possible. And I hope one day that Bitcoin, as a digitally native asset, can be used in a similar way as that shadow bank was working, but let's shine a light on it, because it's on a blockchain, it's transparent, it's visible, we can audit it, we know how much money is created. The Federal Reserve has no idea how many dollars are in the system. Greenspan's speech was saying this for years. Greenspan was like, the rational exuberance of the stock market was completely misunderstood. What he was saying was like, we don't know if this stock boom is overzealous, because we don't know how much money there is. We don't know the behavior. You can look at central bankers going back, like Greenspan, Bernanke, they all say, like, look at their meeting notes. They're all saying, we don't know. We don't know how money's created. We don't do money. What we do is public sentiment. We come out with our FOMC like meeting notes and say we're hawkish or whatever on our interest rates, and that is good enough to change sentiment. The economy is completely just compressing reflexivity, and it's just not like completely reactive to whatever the federal state does, because it's so invisible to investors. So don't fight the Fed. And yeah, I think Bitcoin can very, very nicely fit into that system. And wouldn't it be great to have Bitcoin as like the reserve, and then have like maybe commercial bank liabilities on top of that? But if there's ever any dispute, it collapses back down to Bitcoin instantly. And, it brings back accountability.
So Bitcoin being the fail-safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the argument I'm making also with a lot of Bitcoiner friends in the US, because surprisingly enough, the fintech infrastructure in the US is actually massive compared to what we have in the UK or just in Europe in general. I mean, if you put UK, Europe together, you're sort of on the same height as the US, but the US obviously has more access to liquidity. And I'm always telling them, I'm like, guys, they get Bitcoin. So these are these are not traditional bankers or people working in like asset management groups or whatever, but they are nerds essentially programming open, transparent infrastructure to then be used in this old world. Because the issue, and this is again something not a lot of Bitcoiners know with modern banking as we have it today, is so many different systems are speaking to each other. You have to imagine, we have the system in the UK here with like sort codes, account numbers, then you have like the Swift network, then you have some banking as service providers in the background, and they all have to talk to each other, where that's where I'm going with you, Theo, as well. I'm on the same basis. Like if we have Bitcoin as a base layer there with from a technological standpoint, relative simple tech stack. Like you could build Bitcoin in whatever programming language you want with some minor discretions there. But if someone wants to build it in one language, the other one wants to build it in that language, they can build on it and they can integrate it together and sort of build on top of that. But we still need a system that works in modern everyday life. And if I have a funny story actually. There is a cheese restaurant where I live here in London. They only serve like fondue and all of these stuff. And as a Swiss, I like it. I like fondue and raclette and all of those stuff. And there's a German guy, a waiter working there. And through talking to him, visiting a couple of times, he knew that I talk about Bitcoin a lot, and he's sort of downplaying it. He's always asking me when I come in, is it at zero yet, you know? And he doesn't understand how modern monetary theories and stuff work. And I told him yesterday, I was like, mate, listen, last time we spoke, Bitcoin was at like 16K. Now it's at like 21, whatever it was. Just looking at price levels, it increased, while at the same time, I can bet you other products decreased. But this is not my main issue. It's like, imagine in the future, we have a system where if you want to spend pounds on the Lightning Network or whatever Bitcoin network you want to choose, you'll be able to, or even better, you'll be able to like pick up your phone, open Apple Pay, hold it against a card reader, which might be like a Square card reader, a Paybal's card reader, whatever the fuck it is. And it goes through instantly with no fees for the merchant and sellers as well, all because you're using a different tech stack than what we currently use. And I feel a lot of us Bitcoiners, we have to have that reality check of like, hey, it would be great if we could like open Moon or Wallet of Satoshi and like scan the QR code or tap our card. But at the end of the day, we still live in a system where normal everyday people have to spend their money, and they work hard for their money. They want to spend it, or they might want to save it. That's where Bitcoin is ideally a very cool technology. But at the same time as well, we have to build products on top of that and educate people to as simple as possible that they can take out their phone, their card, their Apple Watch, whatever, and pay it without thinking that they use the network. And I feel like if we do it right, if we do also the education part about the energy resources and such right with Bitcoin, we can get there. But it will be, like you said, I think a compromise that it's not purely decentralized in the matter which it can possibly be. And at the same time, then it's still flexible enough that everyone can use it. Because that's a sacrifice you do. Either it's fully secure and decentralized, slow, I bet hard for normal people to get into, or you have the middle ground where you integrate it into systems where it works and people can use it every day. And imagine how cool that is. Like I can walk down to the coffee shop, pay, even if I want to pay with my bank account or my native Bitcoin account, and it just goes through, and I don't have to dispute and explain how Lightning works and why Bitcoin is superior. It just goes through, and we have a layer built on top of it, like you said, where if it collapses, it goes back down into something safe and not into the abyss of nothingness, essentially.
Yeah, definitely. I think for the first time, we've the network we use has never been an option to us. You don't walk into Starbucks and they go Visa or MasterCard or another network of your choice.
Just tap the card.
You're using, you're using our network and you're using pounds. So yes, being able to have a open network, certainly. Yeah. And like, I think just kind of riffing on that, I think education around these things it's probably, I don't know whether like a merchant saving a couple of percent on transaction fees is the driving force of adoption here. I think on a more profound level, there is a deeper change where, for the first time, my generation is predicted to be worse off than their parents. There is a change where we've gone from one earner households now no longer being able to afford to raise a family, and now it's gone to two earner households, and now it's even more. It's like two earner households aren't even enough to pay, for a family of two kids because of the cost of living. We have gone from a point where a house was 3.5 times annual wages to 22 times annual wages. There is a hollowing out of the financial heart of our society, and money is a form of language. It's a form of expression. When I make a purchase, I am expressing my values to society. And when you manipulate the money, you're manipulating the language. So I can no longer communicate authentically, virtuously, and morally. I am being warped in my decision making, in how I interact with the economy. Having open networks domestically is great to be able to opt into Visa, so that now other companies other than Visa can jump in and use the network and not Visa's closed network, and optimize that. I think that's one piece of the puzzle. I think custody is one of the hardest things that we've got to wrap our heads around. I think like 80% of Bitcoins are still held on exchanges, something ridiculously high.
That much? Wow.
It's ridiculously high.
Wow.
Yeah. Custody, adoption in places like the global south. You can't tell somebody that's living on the margin to put their money in Bitcoin. You can't, because if Bitcoin goes down, they can't afford to eat that week. That's where they are. Like through
and if you take that a step further, Theo, the current people who are unbanked, you talk about, if we're thinking kind of locally here, but if you think about in countries where there's severe poverty and, there's day-to-day survival, it's got to be more than
yeah. Shout out to companies like Fedi, run by Obi. I'm sure you've probably heard of him, who are pioneering that kind of vision of having these community-centered custodians of. It's kind of like, I can't remember the exact term they use. It's like semi custody, or like almost perfect privacy, where they're trying to integrate some form of like dollar-denominated stable asset onto the Bitcoin blockchain using kind of community custody for those that aren't as technically minded. Like, there is progress, and I God hope that progress wins. Like, we haven't won. Like, the battle isn't won. Every day it's alive. It's proving itself, but I don't think every day it's alive it's winning. I think that, like, Moore's law only works because a shitload of people put a shitload of work into making Moore's law still happen. Bitcoin adoption's the same. Just by Bitcoin being here, it's not going to win. It takes a hell of a lot of us, and the Adam backs that are going to pitch the ship and steer the direction. But it takes all of us, like you guys, who are having podcasts, who are opening a conversation, who are all of the bodies of this network, who, without, like, it's in my opinion, without us, I don't know how the future is, and I don't look forward to it for my kids, unless something which is open and democratic and isn't manipulated and is owned by everyone, that's control structure is run by a proof of preservation. It's technology at its finest, because all it cares about is truth, and innovation will commoditize truth at the end of the day. Truth will always come out. So I hope Bitcoin wins. I really fucking do, for my kids' sake,
Right. One important question is, how do you feel having smaller calves than your brother?
Oh yeah, we missed the most important question. Yeah.
Look, okay.
Sorry, he set you
The
up
only-
there, Theo.
Oh, now it's
so
getting
you
nasty.
need,
Now it's
you
getting
need,
nasty.
you need to explain. You need to explain what.
Look, I cannot believe you guys brought this up. My calves are a sensitive point. I'm so upset right now. No, the only reason his calves are bigger than mine is because he's shorter than me, so there's less leg, so it's just squished down a little bit.
Oh, okay.
That's all it is. Angelo recently got into powerlifting, and calves are notoriously a genetic given size. So even though I'm stronger than him on everything else, he can still take the piss out of my calf. So we'll let him have it. We'll let him have it.
Brilliant.
He's you're the older brother, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
4.5
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. You always got to get a W. You always give a W to your younger siblings. Speaking as an older brother as
Got
well, they gotta feel good, right?
How does it stand with people like me who are, I've got a twin. So, and he constantly reminds me that he's 7 minutes older than me. Like that's
Wait, what? Is it an identical twin?
No, fortunately for me, it is not identical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mate, Theo,
Yeah.
Theo, it's been fascinating listening to you. You've given me a lot to think about and reflect on, and I'm looking personally forward to listening back to this because there's a lot of information that's come out from this episode. And thank you for being so open and honest with your mindset and where you're coming from and your angle into Bitcoin. It's been fascinating going down this rabbit hole with you. But before we wrap this up, is there anything that you would like to talk about? Was there anything that you want to discuss before we wrap this up?
I don't think so. I think we did a good job. I wish I could explain things 100 times more eloquently and simpler. And sometimes when you've been down the rabbit hole for so long, you forget where you started. So it can be.
Just look at the heading of our thing.
Yeah.
We're all mad here. So once you're down this rabbit hole, it's a deep rabbit hole. So no, thank you for showing us the route that you've taken. And I'm hoping the people that listen have been able to follow us down your rabbit hole. It's been fascinating. So thank you once again. Joelle, was there anything you wanted to ask?
No, I mean, just generally speaking, where can people find you, Theo? Because I'm sure if they got a question, they should reach out to you directly.
Yeah. So on Twitter, I'm at Bitcoin Theo, and on YouTube, I'm starting to put out a lot more kind of educational content that I'm hoping will be some of the best, well-produced Bitcoin focused, but also just general economic focused content. And I'm teaching like a course kind of thing on blockchainmentoring.com. It's not out yet, but you can drop your email there, which I teach how to build Lightning applications, Lightning powered apps, where you can actually start building with these technologies, which was a big part of me. Like after I got involved for a few years, it was like I actually want to, have a different form of embodied knowledge here rather than just these propositionals that I hold in my head around like reading so much. I was like, let's tinker. And so yeah, I kind of condensed some of that. So I found there was like no real good resources. I think a lot of Bitcoiners, especially the ones that code, are like so heady that they just aren't very good at explaining what things are. But Angelo has a great quote, which was, nothing's complicated. Some things are just harder to explain. So I'm hoping to explain the technicals a bit easier because it's not that hard.
Yeah, once you get it going, once you're in, again, the rabbit hole of development and technicality, it's actually quite easy. But yeah, thanks from my end as well, Theo. That was a really lovely discussion, and I'm sure you'll be back in a future episode, because we don't want to constrain it to just one episode per person. And I'm looking forward to talking to you soon again.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. Thank you guys for having me. Always happy to come on again. It was I enjoyed going down the rabbit hole with you. Although, does that make us all Alice, or am I just Alice in this scenario? I don't know how that works out. Are you guys the rabbit?
I'm happy. I'm happy to be Alice. I'm happy to be anyone you want me to be, mate. Yeah, I mean, yeah. We can all be Alice. We can all be Alice.
Sounds good.
Cool. Talk soon, then, Theo.
All right. See you later, guys. Appreciate you.